That's what I'm interested in, is what are the functioning game titles out there that go this far,
Hmm.
because there are plenty of games that don't go as far as you go, and I'm not even counting the business about how the players don't touch the dice, right? That's one more step, right? That's turning it into the tactile separation as well, or
Right.
the not separation, the tactile transfer of that kind of information over to your side of things.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
Now, another example, which is an extremely different game, which I had reason to discuss for another reason not that long ago, is Puppetland by John Tynes. Puppetland has pretty short adventures. It's very briefly, it's semi-horrific, semi-humorous, surrealistic game in which you're playing puppets. You can play a shadow puppet made of paper. You can play a finger puppet. You can play a hand puppet. And it's not too surprising that players, if they like the game, will often show up with a homemade puppet. But
Sure.
the idea is that you, first of all, there's a mandated way of speaking. The GM has immense total control over the imagined space that the puppets are in, and what transitions occur in that space, and who's there, who's not there, what they can and cannot do. So the GM has an immense amount of control over that. Everything the GM says has to be in past tense. And then the brave trio of puppets proceeded down into the kitchen, something like that. So he's talking in past tense. If you're playing a puppet, you may only talk about what your character does. Indeed, you may only talk in character and narrating your action in character. I flee. I jump over the ironing board. I stab him with my little knife. And
Hmm.
that's how you're supposed to say what your character does. So the way that the GM is talking and the way that the players are talking relies very heavily on the GM saying, what do these puppets see, feel, and know?
Hmm.
And you, as a player, are verbally constrained to be in the space of immediate and visceral response.
Hmm.
And I mean, you can, I suppose, talk philosophy with the other puppets in character too, but I'm talking about character action. So
Hmm.
there's a couple of things. Verbal rules like this often get us around all sorts of nonsense, like what if I do this and can I do that, and stuff like that. You
Hmm.
don't even. I mean, you could say, I suppose, I'm looking around very keenly in case danger falls upon us. I suppose you could say something like that in Puppetland, but typically the GM is supposed to be delivering what you see, know, and hear and stuff like that constantly. And
Okay.
then the puppets could tell as the shadows thickened all around them that there were, the creepy footsteps could be heard in every corner, stuff
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm.
So the mechanics are reasonably robust in Puppetland, a little unusually so for that particular designer, in that you and one of the things too is that as you take damage, you have to tear off pieces of your character sheet. You know.
I thought you were going to say tear off pieces of your puppet.
No, I wouldn't. Yeah, I don't think that. I don't think the you knowing them in that particular play culture, they might actually have gone for that. But
Right.
you do have you don't have to have a puppet, but you do have to have a character sheet, and you
That's
will be
funny.
losing pieces. So
Right.
it anyway, you can see though that it is aimed at the player bathing, or both games are aimed at the player kind of almost giving it up, right? It's like you're giving it up to the GM to be the world. And in both games, the nature of your responses have specific mechanical strictures that give you, actually, it's kind of nice because it gives you the ability to act like that character without always second guessing yourself of, wait, doesn't he, what would he know that would change that? You know, why would I do that or something? You've got something that can kind of springboard you into saying, well, I guess I'm doing this. That's what it is. And so you're able to play, for lack of a better word, with less doubt, even though you are pretty much limited to what someone else is telling you. So that's what I'm kind of interested in for this game, because what sort of well, let's back up again. Let's back up. Let's just go to the pure colorful inspiration of the game. I get to play a what, doing what, with whom, and why, and how cool does it look?
Right. So it is medieval fantasy, but what I'm going for specifically is not any particular time, place, culture, but I put very heavy emphasis on the worldview. I'm aiming toward a deeply anti-modernic, primeval psychology and worldview, which requires a lot from the GMs and the players. It requires that they stop thinking like modernists. And it's partially the verbiage, but it's also partially just our modernic reactions to everything, like dissecting a problem and finding where you can exploit your enemy in a scientific way. This is what we do, and also because everyone by the age of 18 has seen 2,000 movies about how to be a sniper team, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, it is just medieval fantasy, but with this very keen emphasis on anti-modernism, and so forth.
That helps. But now tell me, who am I playing, or what am I playing?
Right, you're playing. I was reading
through. More than one option. Just give me one right now.
Oh, you could be a woodsman.
Awesome. Okay, so I can be a woodsman, and I would be doing what?
Well, probably living in a very barren and almost utterly unknown world. Like, you're aware of that 2-mile radius around your little village, and everything else is a deep fog of war.
Sure. Now, that's fine as a starting point for the character, but say we are in the thick of play, what am I doing?
You are dealing with some threat against probably your village, which had to take you away.
There are probably many options for the GM to choose.
Pick one. Okay. Then there is a witch in the hills manipulating other villages elsewhere to either destroy your village or to... So, your particular character, depending on if you're with others or not, you are in the dark with regards to what to do. I guess you are striving to discover things, but the difference in my play style is it's not, there is this particular kind of enemy that you have to go through, this particular...
Right. You're not talking about a forensic investigation.
That's right.
Some other kind of some other sort of discovery through some other mental process that isn't what we think of as, here's the Wumpus, and here is the corpse of Aunt Jane, and here is the creaky mansion, and now what shall we do? I will hit the books, you will go and question the sheriff, and
Yeah,
so on.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I
Okay.
actually
Yeah.
move very far away from that,
Right.
as far as we can.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's. I think I posed that as the clear, you know,
Hmm.
opposite pole. So
Hmm.
excellent. With whom? You said if I'm acting with others. Let's say I am. Who am I acting with?
It would be people that you probably knew before any crisis
Yes.
emerged, because trusting strangers would
Right.
be strange.
Right.
I was reading through Circle of Hands, and I'm convinced that I need to do what you did with regards to integrating the world early on, like immediately, in fact, right? So you make the world part and parcel of the whole system narrative, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, and what's funny is that your world's even more dismal than mine.
Ah.
My players would not believe it. Yeah, when I was in college in Illinois, I had a history professor from Princeton, and he set me on the path of fixating on the primeval, because he was the first one to tell me that the they were not miserable.
Right.
That is, before feudalism, things were really pretty good.
Yeah.
You were
Feudalism's
free.
feudalism is awful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it really is. And before feudalism, people could have good
Yeah.
lives, from eating to leisure to marrying for love.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you like Circle of Hands, and it has uh, an engagement, I think, with the mechanics that isn't what you're after. But in terms of the player's experience, but that's neither here nor there. The point we're talking about now is the looking through these other eyes. One thing that's very interesting in Circle of Hands, and I think you're getting away from it by having your characters be locals, is it was fascinating during playtests to watch players have their characters arrive somewhere and they go into black ops mode. They actually start literally sneaking along the street, asking me who looks suspicious. What do I see? I say, okay, well, you see a guy walking down that way. I follow him. And you're like, why are you acting like a freaking psycho?
Right.
Aren't you going to live here for the next 6 months? There's 20 people, 100 people who know you're coming. You've got a bed set up for you already.
Right.
What are you doing?
Right.
And and the people would say, "Where's the inn? I want to go to the inn." And you're like,
Oh.
maybe I should have introduced this setting a little differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
So okay. So we're talking about me, my woodsman. We're talking about other locals. Probably maybe even a couple that are related, near or far. And we've got this witch situation. We've got a way of coping with it whereby this is what I'm interested in. What helps me use the right phrasing? You said some verbiage is involved. But what helps me use it in an inspired way so that I am really doing my best to look at it the way that you're telling it to me and that informs what I do. So tell me a little more about that.
Right. So for the woodsman, I guess the only thing that I consider pushing this methodology of unity of perspective is, as the woodsman is going about their business of tracking or watching animal behavior near and far, is that the player will say, I'm doing X and Y, and the GM is always throwing dice, but the majority of the time it's all for show. You're not actually trying to determine anything, because the only time the dice matter, my mechanic, I haven't even talked about the mechanics. The mechanic end of it is, that skill is predominant and there's only wiggle room randomness.
Right.
So if you're good at something, you're good at it.
Right.
And the only time you are taxed at trying something is if that particular task is arduous, or if you're trying to accomplish multiple things
Right.
at the same time, making it arduous.
Sure.
So woodsman is,
hey, I'm going to clear an area for camp, or I'm going to gather, the right kind of brush for what we need. I'm pretty good at it, but if I'm trying to do it under the horrific, fearful cold spells of the witch, then we're going to have to roll. So
that's right.
And I would be feeling it, right? I mean, you'd be telling me it's really brutal. Your fingers are freezing off. The wood is, not a friendly place tonight.
Right.
And meanwhile, you've been rolling like all the time, like rattle, rattle, just in general. Sometimes you tell us, well, too bad, the forest panther just landed on your back. And other times, you're rolling away and you'll say something like, the clouds don't look right. Right.
Right.
I'm trying to see if I'm getting the right idea.
Yeah.